So for those of you that haven't seen the video, I'll put a link up here. I made a mechanical water method injection setup, and if you're curious to how I did it, go ahead and watch that video after you watch this one, of course. But I made that setup a couple days ago over the weekend, and I've slowly been kind of bringing the boost in a little bit. Yesterday I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna tighten up the wastegate a lot. I would make, you know, half or one turn adjustments that didn't really seem to be making a huge difference, so I cranked it in 4 or 5 turns. I'm expecting at least 12 pounds of boost. I backed off the timing, I took another 3 degrees out of it, and then I just did some maintenance yesterday. I do notice though that when I turn up the boost, it spools faster. It gets to the lower boost levels quicker. Like I just rolled into it really quick and it got to 6 pounds like nothing. A little over 12 pounds there. Now I did a dig run yesterday and I slipped the heck out of the clutch and it started to slip and then I had to readjust it. So I'm not gonna launch it, I'm just gonna kind of go from a little stop. So I think this clutch is on its way out, because every time I do a pull and higher boost, this clutch starts to feel mushy. Like I can see it needs another adjustment again. So far the meth injection seems to be working. I am running a 50-50 mixture, and I did it by volume, so it's probably 55% water, so I could add a little bit of methanol. I'm really tempted to turn the boost up more, but with the way the temperatures are right now here in Arizona, I really don't feel all that comfortable doing that. For those of you that don't know, I ride this bike every day. YouTube and building bikes is the only thing I do. That's my main form of income right now. But yeah, this is my main form of transportation, so, you know, probably not the wisest idea to really push the envelope, you know what I mean? I think he was actually flooring it. There's always one guy that goes really slow. We're doing 29. One of the things that I learned when I did the Buell Cyclone setup is on that bike, it has about double the plenum volume that this bike does. And what I've noticed with that is the bike has a lot more mid-range and top end than this bike does. And the earlier Buells, the only difference between that motor and this motor is the compression is a little bit higher on those. But I had the boost down at 8 or 9 pounds and it pulls stronger than this does on 12. Plenum volume has a really big effect on turbo V-twins, and that's what I'm starting to learn. That's one of the main cons to the draw-through turbo setup, is you're kind of limited because you can't have too much plenum volume, because when you have your throttle in front of the turbo, you have all that length of the intake tract. So fuel has a habit, especially if it has to make a bunch of turns, fuel has a habit of falling out of suspension. You have to design the plenum in such a fashion that it doesn't have too many turns, and the intake ports have to be the lowest part of the intake system. Otherwise you'll get fuel puddling. That's the type of stuff that I'm battling when I'm trying to design that turbo kit. The nice thing about having less plenum volume is it keeps the throttle response really good, because that's pretty good. For a draw-through turbo setup, that's really good. Drivability and horsepower kind of they have an inverse relationship on draw-through setups. So if you make the plenum bigger, especially with regards to V-twins, you make the plenum bigger, it'll make more power, but the drivability goes down because it takes longer to heat up the bigger manifold. I noticed on this bike, I can pull the choke, hop on it, and go, and then just ride with the choke on for 2 or 3 minutes, turn the choke off, and it's good. Now on the Buell, which has about double the plenum volume of this, I've noticed that when I fire it up, you can't touch or rev the throttle even with the choke on, because it just bogs. And that bike needs at least a couple minutes of idling on the choke before you can bother trying to put it in gear and ride. You can't get too carried away with plenum volume when you're chasing power on a bike that you ride on the street. It just won't run good. Turbocharging with a mechanical fuel system, aka a carburetor, it's just a giant set of compromises. Can you go blow through? Yeah, you can go blow through. My issue with blow through is the addition of a fuel pump. You have the main drawback of fuel injection, in my opinion, is that the fuel pump can fail, but you don't have the benefit of the super precise fuel control that you do with fuel injection. You don't have the knock sensors, and then you have the getting it dialed in and making it run consistent, which is a pain on blow through, especially getting it to transition into boost right. And then even if you do that, if your float sticks in your carb, it floods the manifold, floods the motor, and you're stranded. For those of you that remember the twin turbo Cafe Racer build, I did blow through on that. But the thing that made me tear off the blow through setup and make me throw my hands up and say forget blow through is I was on a ride one day and I stopped to get some gas and I turned the bike back on, and then of course I had the fuel pump wired to the ignition switch, so as soon as you turn the ignition switch the fuel pump comes on, and I turned it over and then I'm sitting there idling, putting my gloves on, and then the bike just dies. And I go to hit the starter button and it won't even turn the engine over. I thought, what the heck? So I sat there and fooled around for a little bit and I was like, man, it really smells strongly of gas. Why is that? It turns out the float on the carburetor stuck. So it just kept, the fuel pump just kept pushing fuel into the intake, and it flooded the intake and flooded the cylinders, and I was stuck there. That pissed me off so much I just tore the whole setup on it and sold the bike. I thought, man, the only thing keeping you from being stranded on this thing is that the float doesn't stick. I mean, the float sticking isn't a rare experience, especially if you have a bike that you don't ride every day. I mean, it's not super uncommon for a float to stick and the carb to weep gas. It's especially common nowadays that we have the 10% ethanol fuel. If you let the bike sit for a month and you go to fire it up, the float might stick and you're up the creek. But not only that, it ended up spilling gas everywhere and it ruined the paint job on the tank, because back then I didn't know to use, I think back then I wasn't using 2K clear, or I was mixing acrylic enamels with different types of paint. You're not supposed to do that. So yeah, that's what happened with that bike. I was so pissed off about that, I tore off the turbo setup and then I repainted the tank and got it running naturally aspirated and sold it. And that was another deal that, you know, I lost money on because I had all the money in the turbo setup that I ended up just not using. I still have the 2 turbos laying around. You know, that was when I only had a flux core welder too. I built that whole bike with a cutoff wheel, a flux core welder, and, you know, just a handful of stuff. I didn't have anything back then. I've read a lot of comments of people saying, man, I wish I had the money or whatever that this guy has. I mean, there's some builds that I've done, man, that I don't even think, including the price of the bike, I have 2,200 bucks in. When I did the Suzuki GS400 build, I think my YouTube channel was only making like 800 bucks or something a month at the time, and I was just paying for everything on credit cards. On that build, I had nothing into that thing, dude. But when I did the GS400 build, I actually pulled the tires, both the front and rear tires, from behind a dirt bike shop. They were just used tires that I was laying around because I didn't want to spend 250 bucks on new tires. So I just got tires that were fat and that were roughly the right size. That's why I put a front tire on the back, because I couldn't find a front tire. So I was slumming it when I built that Suzuki GS400. This bike too, again, I pulled the Öhlins off the XS650, so the shocks are free. The turbo I had laying around, so I didn't spend any money on that. Most of the piping I had from a previous build. I even had white paint that I used as a base for a different build, and so that was free. This I had laying around, this gold paint. That's why I decided to paint it gold, because I was like, well, that's what I have, so I'm just going to use this paint up that I have. Even the carb I pulled off the KZ650, so I'm probably like $3 grand into this bike, including the cost of the bike for a turbo Harley, which is crazy cheap. But yeah, man, if you guys want to get into building bikes and stuff, I mean, you don't need to spend a lot of money to make a bike look pretty sick. If I could get any pointers to you guys that want to get into bike building, is you don't need a big budget, man. You could find a really crappy bike with a title for 200 or 300 bucks if you're patient enough, and you could spend a couple hundred on the bike. You could probably do it with like 1,200 bucks in parts. Anyways, guys, I think that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Check me out on Patreon. I have a complete list of how-to videos, and also check out my main channel, which is Dr. Motorcycle, and there's going to be a lot more content coming to this channel in the future. As I said already before, check out my water methanol injection how-to video. I think you'll enjoy that. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll catch you on the next one.